Getting creative with lighting is the easiest way to instantly change up the mood of a shoot. And that's what I'm talking about in today's video. I'm Jada Parrish, one half of Jada and David. David and I combine set design and photography, but today we are diving into lighting, and I am gonna show you 3 different creative lighting setups that you can use to create conceptual portraits. We're lighting the same scene, the same model, but the results are going to be wildly different. David and I brought our friend Rose into the studio, and we kept the set super simple for this because we want the lighting to do the heavy lifting and create the most visual interest. So we just painted a Hollywood flat and a wooden tabletop, the same color to match the dress that Rose is wearing, just to give it a little bit of a stylized feel. But again, lighting is the star here. So let's jump into the lighting, and I'm going to show you how you can use modifiers, V-flats, and lighting placement to totally change up the feel of an image. First, we wanted to start with a basic 2-light setup. We wanted a clean, polished, high-key feel because this is the style that David and I usually use to light our shoots. We love a more high-key lighting look because it really shows off the set, keeps the colors vibrant, and we also spend a lot of time styling the model's outfit, and we usually make the outfit match the set, which is what we did here. So keeping things kind of true to life with a more high-key setup works great in our work. So that's what we went with here to start. So our key light was the Godox LA300R paired with the QRP70T softbox, and we placed it just slightly above and off to the left of the camera. And then our second light was a rim light, and we used the Godox ML100 bicolor and placed it behind and to the right of Rose, just to create some nice separation between Rose and the backdrop. And then we also added in a white V-flat on the right side to get some positive fill and get a little more light back on Rose's face. Because we're using a smaller modifier, this one is about 27.5 inches, and our key light is positioned to the left side of the camera, we did start to get just a little bit of shadow on the right side of Rose's face. And this is where the V-flat came in. We used the white side of the V-flat to get that positive fill to soften up those shadows. And I really loved how it looked because it still gave that high-key vibe that we were going for, but there was a bit more dimension, and it sculpted Rose's face just a bit. And if we wanted to decrease those shadows even more, we could have taken that white V-flat and moved it even closer into Rose so that we bounced more light onto the right side of her face. But we left it how it was because honestly, I was very happy with how it looked. It was exactly the effect that we were going for. And then another thing to note with this setup is that the key light is also spilling on to the backdrop and helping us light the back wall. So this was a really approachable, simple lighting setup with just 2 lights that you could use for any sort of lifestyle or maybe commercial work that you're doing in the studio. So now let's get a little bit more moody and dramatic with the lighting. We're gonna leave the lights in the same exact positions, but we are going to add a grid to our key light. And instead of using the V-flat for positive fill, we're going to flip it to the black side and get some negative fill on Rose. And that's all going to help us add a little bit more drama and intensity to this image. We're getting so much more shadow across Rose's face, which is adding even more dimension and contrast because our key light now is a little bit more focused and intense on Rose. Notice how the negative fill from the V-flat darkens all the shadows on Rose's right side of her face. And then another important thing to note is how much changing up this lighting, not only did it change Rose, but it really changed up the set and the colors of the set. And the work that David and I do, it is so color centric. So thinking about how your lighting not only affects how you light the subject, but how it impacts the larger image as a whole and what that's going to do with the color is an incredibly important thing to think about, especially when you are taking more creative, stylized photos. So when we compare these lighting setups side by side and look at the images we created, the first setup definitely has a much more commercial feel, and this setup is much more dramatic, more editorial, more fashion heavy. So that's just an important thing to note as you consider what lighting setup is right for your shoot. For the next setup, we wanted to see if we could recreate that high key lighting approach from the first setup, but this time do it only using LED tube lights. We use tube lights in our sets a lot because we love the small footprint and the flexibility they offer. You can throw a tube light anywhere. You can use a tube light to light legs or light a backdrop, or just throw one wherever you need just a little more fill light. For this setup, we used 3 Godox TL120 RGB tube lights. We placed one on each side of the subject, slightly raised up, and then we had one behind our subject mounted centered on the backdrop. What ended up happening was this lighting setup gave us even more of a high key look than the first setup did. Because we had a tube light positioned on each side of the camera pointed right at our model, we didn't get that same shadow that we did on the right side of Rose's face from the first setup. Her face was very evenly lit, and you could see all the details. What a big differentiator was between the first setup and this one is the gradient that the tube light caused on the backdrop. You'll notice if you look at the top of the backdrop, it's a little bit lighter, and then slowly a gradient forms and gets darker as it gets closer to Rose, which worked really well because it helped guide your eye towards our subject and created more visual interest. One of the cool things about these Godox tube lights is that they are dimmable and they are RGB. And obviously we had to experiment with that. First, we experimented with dimming down the light on one side of Rose, just to create a little more dimension within the image and make it not feel quite so high key. But then we had to dive into the color. Colored lighting always adds a little bit more of a surreal vibe. As soon as you add colored light in, it's going to feel a little bit more unnatural, but that can be a really fun thing to explore. Since these are fairly straightforward portraits, we wanted to start kind of simple. So we just ended up using a purple rim light, but we kept the fill light on each side of Rose white. That first combination, it gave us like a pretty cool dreamy look, but it still felt sort of natural because the light on Rose was predominantly white. Then we changed the fill light to the right to blue. When you mix a colored light with a brighter, more overpowering white light, the shadows all take on the hue of the colored light, and that's what we did in these images. And you can see that's what's happening on Rose's right cheek. All of the shadows kind of start to take on a blue tone, and it's really obvious when you compare these two photos side by side. You can see the more orangey tones of the shadows within the cheekbone then take on a more bluey tone. But then we got really crazy and we just decided to experiment with some very dramatic lighting effects. And we used blue light, we used purple light, but then we even added in some yellow light mixed with the purple light because purple and yellow are complementary colors, and you can really play with color theory a little bit when you are exploring colored lighting. When you're using colored lighting, it really is mainly about experimentation and play. Set up your lights, get them how you think that you would like them to be, and then just play with the colors. Take some test shots, make adjustments, see what's working, because you'll quickly start to learn to adapt and take on the effects and the style that you want. And for the last setup, we wanted to use our light a little bit more intentionally here and create a giant bounce using V-flats. So for this lighting setup, we used the LA300R, which we placed on one side of the subject, and we aimed it towards the white V-flat so that we could bounce a ton of soft light back onto Rose. We left one of the light tubes on the backdrop to continue to add a little ambient and a little fill light. This setup gave us a really soft, beautiful fill light on Rose, which created this gorgeous high key effect, but it really all came just from bouncing one light into that V-flat and using it as a giant reflector. It's a really good reminder that you can completely change the light just by redirecting it. You don't need to have tons of lights to pull off some very cool lighting effects. It's about really thinking it through, using what you have, and manipulating the light creatively. So let's just look at all of these photos side by side for a second and take in the different setups that we just worked through. We created some very different images with some very different lighting effects, but what I found interesting is we kind of kept going back to our high key setup that we love, but we tried to achieve that by using very different types of equipment, and it created a different feel within each image. So from clean commercial, high key lighting, to moody, more editorial, surreal, there is so much you can do with light. It's just all about making intentional choices, but also play, experiment, have fun, and just see what you can come up with. Thank you for watching. Please make sure to subscribe to the PPA YouTube channel. Leave a note in the comments which setup was your favorite, but until next time.